Scott, you can't get more red wall than your seat there. So what is happening in Blackpool? Do you see these figures taking place in your seat?
Good morning, Esther and Philip. Absolutely, I'm afraid your figures very much bear out the picture I see on the ground here in Blackpool. So at the moment we have approximately 250 asylum seekers in one single hotel. Were it not for me going to the Home Office and suggesting I would be the first to man the barricades and ban a protest if we were to receive more asylum seekers, I suspect we would have probably have received hundreds more. And what we are tending to see over the last few years is the likes of those red wall areas, Blackpool, Stoke being a classic example, getting far more asylum seekers than the traditional areas of the home counties and the south east. And this is worrying from a number of different angles. Not just do these red wall areas have more social problems, invariably more pressure on public services, they tend to be more deprived as well. So this is adding additional burdens to the local authorities in those areas compared to more affluent parts of the country, which are probably better placed to assimilate people.
Scott, I just wondered though, I suppose just to put the other side of the coin, in order to keep the cost to the taxpayer as low as possible, isn't it sort of inevitable that more will be housed and put up in hotels with the lowest accommodation and hotel costs? Isn't that better for the taxpayer than putting them up in sort of flash, expensive, affluent areas, and therefore it's inevitable that that's likely to happen? What would you say to that?
Oh, did you hear us there?
As the bottom line, then clearly there's probably going to be cheaper accommodation in the likes of my constituency, some of those northern mill towns, potentially Bradford, your own district included. So if cost is the bottom line, then you can see why this approach would be followed. However, I think you have to look at the whole perspective here, and it's completely immoral that northern councils who are already facing significant challenges have to adjust to this extra burden, while those southern councils, who tend to be more affluent, tend to have less social pressures placed upon them, are getting away scot-free. And the classic example, for example, would be Scotland, where we hear SNP members of Parliament regularly criticising the government for not being hospitable, not taking more asylum seekers, and yet the number of Scottish local authorities taking new people into the country is shockingly low. So there is an imbalance across the country here, but we have to look at both things, not just the bottom line to the taxpayer, but the broader picture of how this is affecting communities such as Blackpool when they have hundreds of extra people placed upon them.
Scott, talking about how it's affecting people locally, what are the tensions on the ground? We saw last week in Knowsley, on Merseyside, the tensions flaring there. What are you having to deal with? And this is something as well the government needs to be aware of.
Those shocking images, as you said. Touch wood, we don't have any similar tensions in Blackpool, so to speak, but what I can tell you is this has been the #1 issue in my post bag for the last 3 years. I can barely knock on a door in Blackpool or go to the pub for a local pint without somebody tapping me on the shoulder and saying, for goodness sake, get a grip of the small boats crisis. And when on earth is the Home Office going to start processing people who are already here to make sure we can frequent some of those hotels like I have in Blackpool? So I think the public are sick and tired of this issue. I think the Home Office understand this, certainly the political leadership from the Home Secretary. We've been promised legislation from the Prime Minister. This needs to come through now as a matter of urgency, because the longer this goes on, I'm afraid there is more and more of a fear that we will see those images in Knowsley last week repeated elsewhere across the country.